Alrighty, let's pick up from where we left off on the last video. So I was explaining that when you have a square root, the answer will always be positive. I'll show you a couple examples. Square root of 16, positive 4. Square root of negative 16, positive 4i. Square root of negative 25, positive 5i. There's no way to get a negative answer when you take a square root. So when I look at this, I go, oh, it's impossible to have a negative answer when you're taking the square root. Would the average intermediate algebra student pick up on that? Probably not. So let's do what the average intermediate algebra student would probably do. They go, okay, I got my x alone. I divided both sides by 4. Negative 2 over 4 when you divide them both by 2 gave you negative 1/2, and I just flipped the equation over. So my radical's isolated for a second time. So that means I'm ready to undo the radical by squaring both sides. And like I said, this is what most students would do. They wouldn't pick up on it that there's not a solution. They just finish it, and you'll find that it's not a solution when you check. So if you didn't recognize that, not a problem, because you'll find it later. So these two undo each other. So I get x equals negative 1/2 times negative 1/2. So negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. 2 times 2 is 4. So this is what you should have been doing in your head. Negative 1/2 times negative 1/2. A negative times a negative, positive. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. So that is our potential solution. So now let's go over to our checking page and let's write check on next page, just to remind yourself to don't forget to look back at those checks, because you forget a check one on the test, it could be the one that's no solution, because I absolutely put at least one on the test that will not have a solution check. Okay, so let's take a look here. So I wrote check for number 22. Get my paper in the middle here. I wrote the original problem. Square root x plus 2 equals square root x plus 2. And I'm checking for the possible solution x equals 1/4. So I like to write that here too. So this is definitely going to be a calculator problem. No problem. Calculators are usually faster than a lot of our brains anyway. So we're going to put negative 1/4 in here and here. We're going to type in this side, get an answer. We're going to type in this side, get an answer. If the answers match, we go, yay, this is my solution. If the answers don't match, then we'll write no solution. So let's get it ready for the calculator. So 1/4 plus 2 underneath the square root, does that equal square root 1/4 plus 2? So that is the question. So let's go ahead and I'm going to turn on the light here to make that a little brighter. So let's type in the left side first. So we hit second x squared, which brings the square root sign. Then we do 1 fraction bar 4 plus 2. Now we have to close the parentheses to tell the calculator it's not just 1/4 I want it to take the square root of, it's all of that. Because see how it's all underneath the square root sign? And that's how you tell the calculator to take the square root of all of it. Otherwise, it's only going to take the square root of the first thing after it. So that comes out to be 1/2. See what I said? So easy to check on the calculator. So now we have to type in the right-hand side and see what we get. So this one is just square root 1/4. So second x squared, 1 fraction bar 4. This time we end the parentheses now because this is the end of the radical. and then outside we write plus 2. And that is 2.5. And these two numbers are not the same. So that is how we can tell also that it would be no solution. So eventually, would it be great if you would be able to recognize that square root x equals negative 1/2 is not possible? Yeah, eventually you should recognize that. But right now we're new, you're learning online. So, if you don't, there's a backup plan. Check it. You see that they're not the same, so you go up and cross out your solution. Since there's not another one to pick, you just write no solution. Okay, so we have 2 more factoring problems to look at, and then we are done with Chapter 6. Next, it's your turn to produce on the Chapter 6 test. Okay, so let's look at those 2 factoring problems on the back of the Chapter 6 practice test. So the reason I brought these up again is because we have so much factoring in the next chapter. And we really haven't had a lot in this radical chapter. Not a lot of factoring. I think there's been 2 times that I can think of that we factored. So just want to make sure everybody's on top of factoring still. You remember all the different methods. Ton of factoring on your final exam. So you definitely want to make sure you know how to factor. So I look at A and I say to myself, wow, 2 terms. She told us something about that. If it's 2 terms, it's either GCF, squares, or cubes in that order. So if it's 2 of them, you have to do whatever listed first. So let's talk about GCF. Does this have a GCF? Yes. Has a GCF of 5, right? So that's step 1. Take a 5 out. And when I divide each of these by 5, I get 1 minus 8x cubed. So you should have some bells going off in your head. Ding, 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 ding. This now is squares or cubes because we did the GCF, so there's only 2 things left, squares or cubes. 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. X times x times x is x cubed. So this is a difference of cubes. You remember those big hint words I gave you? For cubes, we do SOAP, and then we do SMS. So that means 5 stays outside. We learned with cubes, you have a small parenthesis and you have a large one. And yes, you do have cube factoring on the final exam. So this is one you need to know. So we learned first you take the cube root. So the cube root of 1 is 1. The cube root of 8 is 2. The cube root of x cubed is x. And that's the most important step because if you miss that, that'll make you miss this because we're going to use this parenthesis to fill in that one. So make sure you're very careful when you do the cube roots. And remember the signs, same, opposite, always positive. So get those signs in, then you don't have to worry about them. And then we learned that this is SMS, square, multiply, square. I'll write it down here since it's kind of covered up by the words. So what that means is we square the first term. What's 1 times 1? 1. This means multiply the 2 terms together. What's 1 times 2x? 2x. And remember, we don't look at signs because the signs are set in SOAP. And S means square the last term. So that would be 2x times 2x. Not paying attention to the signs are already there. And that gives us 4x squared. Done. So that is double factoring. First a GCF, then our cubes, setting our signs with SOAPs, taking the cube roots, and then doing square, multiply, square. And then B, That should be a really familiar one. I don't think we did anything more than we did 4 terms because all of our AC methods were 4 terms. So the minute you see 4 terms, you should go, boom, this is a grouping problem. But just like every other problem, you still have to look for a GCF first. So yes, it is grouping. Absolutely, that's the only way we know how to factor 4 terms. But if there's a GCF, you have to take it out first. So let's look and see. Is A common to every term? No. Is Y common to every term? No. Is X? No. Any number? Yes. 2's common to every single term. So I have to take 2 out of all of them. Then I can do my grouping. And do you think most students do that? Nope. They see 4 terms, they start grouping. They forget GCF is always first. So I get AX minus 5X plus AY minus 5Y. Now I can start my grouping. And remember, this is where you put the 2 outside brackets so that it doesn't get in the way, because it's not part of your grouping, but it does have to be part of the answer. So just put it outside brackets. So here I have an X common. When I take an X out of each term, I have A minus 5. The plus sign, or whatever sign is there, always comes down. Here I have a Y common, so I take a Y out, and once I take a Y out of each term, I'm left with A minus 5. And this is when we do our happy dance, because if these parentheses match, you're probably on the right track. And remember, if they don't match, you've made a mistake. Go back and find your error, because they must match or you can't go on after this. So then to write my final answer, 2 stays out in front. Then I take out what's common, A minus 5. So the 2's been listed, the A minus 5's been listed, and then what's left goes in the second parentheses, which would be X plus Y. And remember, order doesn't matter. Yes, the constant has to be listed first, but order doesn't matter on the parentheses. So that is a blast from the past, way back from the beginning of the course. And your Chapter 6 practice test is now completed. Study hard, guys.